Well, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. They wrote a book. When I need your help, I'll let you know, and it's fantastic. It took me about 3 hours to read. The funny story with Barbara is she works in the same office tower as I do, and we were in an elevator, and I'm not necessarily a shy wallflower, so I said hi, and then I saw that she had this little book sticking out of her pocketbook, and I said, oh, what's that? And she was telling me, she's an elder law attorney, and it's like, oh, cool. So here, read it. So I did, and then I said, you know what? A lot of my clients, this is really important stuff. So let's do some stuff together. So we have been. So let me introduce her father, Stephen Adler. Stephen Adler left Nazi Germany in 1939 at the age of 8 to war-torn Great Britain. Later, his family reunited, and he immigrated with his parents and his brother to Chicago. Steve and his older brother were featured as quiz kids, a popular radio and television broadcast show in the late 1940s. So you probably watched that. Oh, it was on TV. It was on TV. Sorry, it was on. It's on YouTube. Well, you can watch it now on YouTube, but it was on TV and the radio, and it was pretty funny. So in 1951, Steve married his high school sweetheart, Judy Weinberg. He completed his schooling and earned a PhD degree in chemistry at Northwestern University in 1954. Steve and Judy moved to Connecticut, where he began a career in industrial chemical research, and they raised 2 daughters. They retired to Seattle in 2000. Steve has been a speaker for the Washington State Holocaust Resource Center since then, teaching his history to middle school students across the state, learning from the lessons of the past and current in humanity. Barbara was born in Connecticut in 1957. She attended public school and graduated from UConn with a BA in English in 1979. She moved to Seattle in 1982 and earned a law degree from Seattle University in 1989. Barbara has worked as an estate planning and elder law attorney in the Seattle area since 1997. She is an inordinately proud single mother of 2 brilliant children, ages 25 and 27. And in her spare time, Barbara designs and sews quilts and gardens and plots any dirt she can find. She enjoys social dance, plays guitar, ukulele, and is learning to play the violin.
Oh, wow.
In her spare time, she manages her family's brood of cats. So we have some projects for gardening that I'll have to tell you about.
All right.
But I want to have you guys come up, and thank you so much for joining us. And I think you just used the arrows on here.
Okay.
One will do.
So which of these okay, all right. So I'm Barbara West, and this is my father, Steve Adler, and my mom, Judy, had Alzheimer's disease, and she died after about an illness of 7 years duration. My dad and I took care of her. At the time she was passing away, he was really sick, and so I was also taking care of him. And when the dust had sort of settled and he was well again and back in his home after a almost 6-month rehabilitation, we wondered why people are so reluctant to go into a community, residential community, when they're older, because that's where my parents had been living. And during this crisis in their lives and in my life, there had been a lot of support for me and for them from living in this, what we call a congregate setting. I'm not talking about church, right? But where people live together. And I'm going to tell a joke. No, I'm going to tell a joke. And I said to him, what's the matter with all these clients of mine? He's like, oh, I'm not moving, And they dig in their heels and they won't move. But anyway, so that's kind of how our book was born, and of course the title. But when I was younger and just starting out in business, my dad, who is very experienced, said you always need to begin an address with a joke. So this is the joke that he taught me. The young woman has researched care facilities, and she finds one that she thinks is good for her aging father, and she enrolls him, and he gets into his bed on the first day, and she gets him all set up, and she says, now Dad, I'm going to run to the store, I'll be back around dinner time. I hope it's going to be a great opportunity for you. You know, you've got care now. He sits in his bed, and after a little while, he's kind of listed to one side, and an aide comes in, and they notice, and they push him back and center him on his pillows, and an hour or so later, he's gone off to the other side, and someone stops in the doorway, and they see him, and they move him back to center. His daughter comes in around dinner time, and she says, "Well, Dad, what do you think? Do you love it? It's great." He says, "No, I don't like it here at all." She says, "Why?" He says, "They won't let me pass gas."
Every joke has a bit of reality in it. Of course, this one does too. And a bit of reality is that when you're put into a new environment, especially when you're older, the thought of going can produce a tremendous amount of anxiety. And one of the things we realized when we were thinking about writing the book is that this anxiety is one of the factors that pushes older people to stay where they are. You know, this guy knew exactly what he needed to do when he was in bed, and he didn't know what was going to happen when he went to a new place. And of course, there are many other questions that older people have. You know, where is the bathroom, and how do I get my meals, and how do I meet people? And it's just there's endless questions. So, why could we write the book? Well, Barb has more than 25 years of experience in the law, dealing with families and older people. So her authority to talk about this issue unquestioned. And of course, I've been I've been living it. So between the two of us, we really cover the topic excellently. And that's why we could write the book. Now I want to say something about myths. Oh, no, I'm not going to say something. In thinking about what's going on with older people, we came to a realization that when people don't do something, when they don't want to take the action, they're actually doing something. And the thing that they're doing is they're shrinking their options. Something that you could have done, let's say, I'll pick a number, 75, may not be there anymore at age 80 or 85. And we have lots and lots of cases of people who are digging in their heels and, in effect, shrinking those options. So, bad. Okay? We could do it without.
Oh, wait. Wrong arrow. Sorry.
So, myths. Every culture has myths. And those are designed to help people cope with traumatic events. So, for example, the tooth fairy lets you, as a child, let you deal with a terrible problem that a tooth fell out. You know, what'll happen when they're all gone? Well, the tooth fairy is the way around that. Santa Claus is another one. And as you get older, there are other myths that are used to help people deal with big questions in their lives. And those myths are not dangerous. No, they're helpful. But when you get really older, there are other myths that can produce real problems. As I said before, if a myth prevents you from doing something, it forces you into a situation where, for example, you could be exploited, get inadequate care, and older people need a lot of it. And of course, ultimately, it leads to death. Go ahead, you
Okay.
can talk about that.
We had a slide about the 5 myths, but we don't need that. When we were talking about the writing a book, I thought it was important to set this conversation in an appropriate context, and that is that we're in the midst of the baby boom. Most of us were probably born in those years, 46 and 64, and 100,000 people retiring every day. But I think the most important point is the number of people who are retiring now as single people without the expectation of an extended family to provide them care. That's going to result in a huge wave of people who need care services. Seniors are vulnerable to fraud and exploitation because as your hearing declines and your vision declines and your mobility declines, other aspects of your body and mental processing are also losing their sharpness. People begin to focus on what they're hearing instead of seeing. They don't cue into body language. They filter out negative messages if they don't want to hear them. So the example of the person on the phone calling a senior every day to ask for money for some scam to support this Nigerian king or whatever, right? The person on the end of the phone who is elderly and isolated and doesn't get much attention from family or friends is really focusing on the fact that every day he or she now has a caller. And that means something. So there's a positive bias toward this person that will sometimes allow people to succumb to frauds. So, you know, this is the depressing part, but we know the estimate is that $36.5 billion is annually lost to fraud and exploitation of seniors. But there are only a very few number of crimes reported. So I really think of the $36.5 billion as the tip of the iceberg. Many seniors who are exploited won't come forward. They're afraid, they're embarrassed. They think if they tell their family that they lost money to a scam artist, the family's gonna take away their card, their checkbook, and put them in a nursing home, right? I'll go and get a, guardianship for that person. Can't do that. The important piece of information on this slide is that the overwhelming number of people who abuse seniors are their caretakers, who are their family. And I don't know why that is.
Well, why it is they are close to the individual, that they have trust. Mom trusts son or daughter, and unfortunately sometimes Sonny or the daughter takes the money. So we have some terrific examples in the book of that kind of stuff going on. So what are the senior myths? Well, the first one is in the title. And the reason that we have the book title the way it is we started with a working title of 5 senior myths, and when Barb was talking to people that she was getting together with, they said, well, what is a senior myth? So she decided, excellent, let's put one of the myths into the title, then it's clear. So when I need your help, I'll let you know. We're going to talk about this one in great detail. We're going to skip through 2, 3, and 4, but right now let's look at them, and then Barb will also talk about number 5. But you can see that all of them have this pattern of, I'm not going to do anything if I don't do anything, it'll be just great. Well, it isn't. So, in the book, we have essentially 5 chapters, one for each of the myths. And the first one is when I need your help. I'll let you know. What's wrong with that is that when the older person really needs help, they're often unable to ask for it. Or, if they can ask for it, the person that would be the one to help is unable to do it because of other commitments. They may not be living in the same state anymore. There are many issues like that. Anyway, when you're getting older, it's one thing if you are eccentric and, you know, just like to keep every copy of the Seattle Times or the PI and pile them up in piles in the kitchen. But if you're doing it because there's some kind of a dementia going on, then you're losing what is called capacity. When you're incapacitated, you need help. We've defined for each of these myths soft issues. Now these are the ones that are based on feelings, and you can see what they are here. You can't measure them. You can see them, you can experience them. Let me take the last one. The family isn't of one mind about what is the right thing to do with the older person. Oh, not all the time. But you can't, it's not measurable. So let's go to the hard issues. These are very, very much quantifiable. If you are going to be considered fully functional and capable, you can take care of all those things: eating, bathing, dressing, toileting, and transferring. But when older people start to lose some of their capabilities, then you can definitely see, you know, dad simply can't make it into the bathroom, or can't make it into the shower, can't get dressed anymore. You can measure that. So it's a hard issue. And the last thing we have in each chapter is, you know, what are we going to do about it? Well, in each case, we provide tools for the individual who is the caregiver. What can the son or daughter do when the parent is no longer capable of handling some of those issues? What you need are powers of attorney. And we go into the definition, and we also talk about how you manage a situation like that. We also provide information about the duties of the individual who holds the power of attorney. It's an important role to play, and there are lots and lots of rules that you have to follow. Okay?
So I'm going to talk about what we have as our 5th myth. And, you know, when we began to discuss putting a book together, so we were talking about these myths that I hear all the time when I work. And we thought, well, okay, so there's the myth, and what's the corresponding, you know, what's the flip side of that coin? So that's what we call the reality. So your parent or your loved one is saying, I don't need your help, and I'll let you know when I do, and they're walking around with their clothes on backward and they haven't taken a shower in 2 weeks. So we wanted to give the person who's in that situation some help. So we talk about the reality. Why is the person refusing help? And then what can you do? I mean, you can't force someone to leave home. So you can go to a lawyer and you can get power of attorney that will let you step in and help where there's some deficits showing for that person. So the fifth thing is, so I've been a lawyer since 1990, and if I had a dime for everyone who said this to me, I would be retired. But they say, oh, I live in a community property state, I don't need to do a will, my kids can sort it out. Well, community property only applies to married couples. So if you're single, that's not really going to help you. And if you don't have children to work on your estate when you're gone, then you're really leaving your affairs in a giant mess. So again, I hear this all the time, and we thought, well, what underlies this myth? So we thought, okay, the soft issues, the non-measurable, non-quantifiable things. Why don't people want to put these things in writing? Well, I think to some extent people, especially right now, long for another day. Quieter, less complicated, kind of lower volume. Things they say used to be done on a handshake. Well, there was never a will done with a handshake, but people kind of long for that simpler time. They may have disparities between money that they've given to different children based on their feelings about the children, based on the children's need, based on their economic situation from time to time. But in a will, they might feel forced to go back and examine what was handed out and call in some loans or forgive loans. That can be difficult because they don't know how people will react when they're gone. They may feel pressure to appoint the oldest child to be the administrator or executor of the estate, but they don't think that that's actually the child that's got the correct skills to do it. The last one is devastating, and there are some people who are really angry at their families and are leaving them a message about that, and they want them to fight it out. The hard issues, the reality and the quantifiable fact, though, is if you don't go to a lawyer and draft a simple will, you are leaving your families a more expensive, lengthier, and potentially more chaotic estate because you haven't put anybody in charge. So someone has to come forward. Well, if the person who comes forward has a conflict with someone else in the family, this is a great opportunity for them to start fighting in a court of law, which, as everyone knows, is expensive. If you don't have a will, wills in Washington state provide for non-intervention authority, then almost everything the executor does is going to have to be approved by a court. That means a lawyer has to be paid and has to go into court, file the paperwork, and have a hearing. There's no reason why anyone's estate in Washington needs to be placed before a court of law. We have the opportunity to do this ourselves, but it does require that you kind of take your fears in hand and try to manage what you fear over the reality. And so these are the tools that I talk about in this chapter that relate to the idea of estate management. What is probate? We define these. There's actually a glossary of terms in the book that talks, that identifies and defines things like power of attorney, probate, intestacy, all these terms that you may hear related to seniors and their care. So in the 5th chapter, the tools for the caregiver are just some facts about why a will is simple, inexpensive, and necessary. And again, we encourage people to take action because failing to take action is in itself doing something. I mean, you're deciding not to do something. That's an action. And so, if you choose not to plan ahead, as I like to say, the government of the state of Washington has its own plan for you and your family. But most people prefer really to leave directions about the passing of their estate.
Why is the book necessary? We discovered after we had there is no such a book in existence. And we felt that this book, giving people clear, simple look at what's going on with seniors and how to deal with those problems was, it was definitely needed. I think we made it in 30 minutes.
That's our talk. We have copies of the book. It's available on Amazon.com. And there's a Kindle version, no audiobook.
Does anybody have any questions for him?
I have a question.
Yep.
So, what if you have a neighbor and maybe he or she is an elderly person and you just feel something's going on? Maybe your kids or his kids are coming over. Something doesn't feel right. Who do you contact?
If you think someone's in trouble, you can contact Adult Protective Services, and the number is 1-800-END harm, HARM, and you can make a referral. They're anonymous, and they'll do what they call a well person check, and they'll open an investigation. But it's important. I mean, you know, it really does take a village in a sense, and people really do need to look out for one another because stuff happens all the time. Yeah.
Who are we getting a visit?
This doesn't wait a second, I'm sorry. Oh, ladies first.
Okay, I have a question. If you have a trust, do you have to have a will as well?
The question is whether or not you have to have a will and a trust, and it depends on what kind of a trust you have. So I would have to, that's something I would need to advise you on. Some trusts they do ask, you know, you are supposed to have sort of what we call a backup will, just in case something gets left out of the trust.
Can you add on to the will then?
Yes.
Just take that will.
You can add on to a will or a trust unless you lose capacity, you know, at any time.
Remove everything from the trust.
Put it in, take it out, put it back in. You got a question?
Yeah, so we do have a living trust and a will set up in California, and we moved here about a year ago. I was wondering if there's any Washington-specific clauses we should consider adding.
Does everybody hear the question? So they move from state to state. You should sit down with an attorney and let him take a look at that. Usually what we do is just amend your trust and say, from now on, this trust is regulated by the laws of the state of Washington, and everything else is the same.
Okay.
It's really simple.
Could I go back for a moment? In the case of my wife and me, the trust that we had referred to the investments, but there are other things that you have besides investments. You've got items of value in the safe deposit box. You know, you probably want to write down, you know, this one gets this and that one gets that. Otherwise, when the person passes away, that can be conflict.
Yes.
When it comes to the balance between letting seniors take care of their own affairs and letting courts and family members step in, where you think the state does a decent job of landing the right balance, and if not, which way should it go?
So the question is, and this is probably the question I get 99% of the time, where's the line between being capacitated and not? So Washington's guardianship law, RCW 11.88 says that you can be eccentric or crazy or alcoholic or drug addled, but if you are at risk as to your personal safety, then you need a guardian to manage your personal needs. And if you are at risk as to the security of your finances and your property, and you've shown over time that you can't manage those aspects of your life, then you should have a guardian to manage those things. So everything else they kind of look at. So, you know, people might need a guardian of a state, but they are so into politics they want to vote, they could vote, right? They might need a guardian of a state, but be able to make a judgment about adopting a child or marrying, so there are all kinds of rights. And so all of these things are evaluated by the court. If somebody is really, again, a lot of it is, have they always lived this way, or is this just recent? And I use the example of my mom. She really lost capacity. She was okay because my dad was there to assist her and to make everything okay. But you could see she didn't know how to get dressed anymore. If she had been on her own, she wasn't eating properly, she refused to go to the doctor, she couldn't read. After a while, she wouldn't have been able to manage money. So if she hadn't had her agent under power of attorney, she would have probably needed a guardian appointed by a court.
Which reminds another topic which I was wondering if you're addressing in your book, which is advanced health directives.
In the book, we talk. The question is, do we talk about advanced healthcare directives, which are these? You have several layers. One is a directive called a living will that a lawyer can write. If you go into a senior residence, where my dad is, they will have you sign a physician's orders regarding life-sustaining treatment. Those are those green forms. They're issued by the Department of Health. So we do talk about what those are and how to get them.
Does the book talk about the assisted living approaches? Luckily, I have an older sister that managed that for my family last year. But the questions of whether you pre-purchase up front or you pay the monthly or how long you're going to live, does it cover any of those kind of difficult questions? Or?
We didn't. No.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
No, we didn't do that.
we felt that it was impossible to speak about specific options.
Yeah.
What we're saying is someone who can do this analysis should sit with the older person, look at their situation, and then determine which options can be
We weren't sure how to find such a person.
used, because
Right?
not everyone can live in every
Yeah.
kind of a situation.
Yeah.
And every community has different kinds of options. For example, Washington State has something called adult family homes. They're private houses, they can take up to 6 residents, but they don't have those in every
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
So that's a very difficult question.
Yeah.
There are people though who specialize in helping seniors
Yeah.
find places to live and evaluating, do they do the rental or the buy-in and what's best.
So just for everyone here, because it was kind of a humorous story, is we used a financial planner to help us guide us, and they walk you through a laundry list of questions: what surgeries, what medications, what where, and they looked at the paper and they said, well, according to this, you're going to live to be 135 years old. There's no way you could afford going into assisted living. So we rolled the dice and said, we're going.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
I do know that locally at the North Bend Senior Center, they have a social worker there.
That helps.
Probably
Yeah.
Oh,
That's a
great
good idea.
Yeah.
I coming from the retail side, I sell cars, and so we currently have a family in North Bend who they've been calling about every other week now to warn us not to sell their dad a car because he keeps wanting to call. And so he's come in, called last week. He's trying to get a brand new S10. That's what he'd like to purchase. So we know on the flip side of that, 3 years ago, I had this gal from Fall City who came out, grandma wanted to buy a car for her granddaughter because someone had stolen her car. So she was coming up to get a car for her granddaughter and her great-grandchild, and we sold her the car, no big deal. And I called to get insurance from a local insurance agency, and they're like, Lisa, I'm like, what? Well, I go, her car got stolen, so I need an insurance card. And actually what had happened is her children had somebody come and steal her car and took it, and she was as coherent, there was nothing wrong with her. And she went fine, and I usually know between the drunks who I take on a test drive and the older people who should not be.
That was one time, Lisa, one time.
She totally was.
I can't believe she brought that
was fine to drive a car. So I went ahead and I found out the part about that they stole the car after the fact. And I'm like, I have no reason not to sell her a car. And I sold it and she walked and everything's fine. And she took it home and, you know, she got the car so that her granddaughter, great-grandchild had a car. But she got a car because someone had stole it. So there's this interesting line when people think that they're doing something for the best because they believe that, well, I don't think she should be driving. You know, when I was little, my grandma knew at the point, well, granted she went through her house, but drove the car through the window.
Right.
But she knew there was a point when she was done and she had to park the car and put the keys in it. So thank goodness.
Like only the car was in the dining room.
Right, exactly. But it's interesting to see, you know, yeah, I appreciate you guys coming in, that was awesome.
Yeah.